Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about doing data security for Z. And I'm going to kick this off with talking about Guardium for Datasets. And then Roy's going to talk about DB2 and Thomas is going to talk about IMS. For those of you, I spent a long time at IBM working in doing various security roles that are out there. So now I'm working at Rocket Software, talking to various customers from executives all the way down to security analysts about security on Z. So really when we think about some of this is one of the things that IBM always talks about is the mainframe is secure, but it really is the most secureable platform that's out there. And just because you may have a external security package like RACF, Top Secret, or ACF2, a lot of times people go, we don't need to, audit this environment because we've got this, it's secure. But as we're going to talk about today, is you need to understand who is changing maybe configuration files that have to do with like DB2 or IMS or other products that you may have in your environment, as well as then looking at what's going on within those databases. So you really need to understand it's not even just about privileged users, but maybe people have more access to things than they really need to. And that's where you really need to look at this and be able to monitor who's getting at some of those sensitive resources in your environment. So when you really want to think about this is you really want, again, from people accessing that resource that's not appropriate to their job. As IBM has done a lot of studies, a lot of times people have more access to things than they really need. And you really want to make sure that you're doing something to not have a malicious update or attack from somebody within inside your environment or somebody who really just doesn't realize they have the authority to do something in your environment. So that's really why you need to be able to look at not just the infrastructure, which I'm going to talk a little bit about with Guardium for Datasets, but also then look at the data that is within the databases itself. So if you're familiar with Guardium, distributed, we're going to talk a little bit about Guardium for Z components. As with the distributed, there's really that collector that's going to store this data securely that's collected by the mainframe STAP. Again, it's going to help you do the analytics and reporting of maybe what's going on in your environment. And now you can start taking and looking at this from an enterprise standpoint as I can get this information and look at it from an enterprise-wide viewpoint. So there really are three STAPs for the mainframe. There's one for DB2, IMS, and Datasets. I'm specifically going to talk about the Datasets, which is really helping you collect that information. It gives you the capabilities to have policies that are out there and be able to filter that data on what you need. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about when you think about this, what can happen. And we put this picture together to show some of this from an enterprise viewpoint. So when you're running on like ZOS, you can have Guardium for DB2, IMS Datasets. You can have them running on multiple LPARs to collect this information, as well as you can have this from a distributed environment, collecting all this and putting this into the Guardium collector that's out there, and then being able to analyze this data across the enterprise. When you really think about it, and Tanzel talked a little bit about this, is with the regulatory requirements that are coming out here. I was actually listening to a session yesterday, and just even worldwide, there's like 80 different regulations that are out there right now for various aspects. So you want to be able to meet those regulatory requirements that are out there for those specific activities, be able to understand and be able to get real-time alerting when that unusual activity may be happening in your environment. Like maybe somebody has updated a configuration file in your environment that you need to know about because it could possibly cause an outage within your DB2 or IMS environment. and be able to flexible to make changes, test this out in your environment, and then obviously when you think about this is looking at this and making sure that it's doing things efficiently as possible for mainframe usage that's out there. So one of the things I want to step back and take a little bit of time to talk now specifically a little bit more about Guardium for Datasets is what's happening with Guardium for Datasets is it's using SMF, the System Management Facility, to record and gather information in your environment. And I have a screen coming up in a couple slides later that kind of shows you how that happens. So for those of you that may not be specific to mainframe, think of SMF as like the Unix logs or the Windows logs or the server logs that are out there. It's really collecting all this activity that's going on in your ZOS environment. And specifically what the Guardium STAP for Datasets is going to do is it's really looking at those files that are out there. So again, datasets you can consider they're like files that you may have in Windows Explorer as an example. And you know, who's touched some of those files, some of those libraries that are out there that are supporting the ZOS environment, as well as other products like DB2, IMS, etc. So it really is collecting this information, and what this information is collecting is it's collecting things about who's touched this data set, have they updated it, have they deleted it. But again, when you think about this, I'm getting this information, I can take this information once it goes down into Guardium, be able to collect this. I've got start and end times that are out there, and I can actually get a lot more information on what's happening for what is being maybe modified in my overall ZOS environment, you know, that infrastructure that's supporting that I need to make sure is available for DB2, and IMS is just one example. So when we talk a little bit more about this, one of the things to think about is, you know, this will work whether it's, you know, this is security package independent. So whether you've got top CA, or it's actually Broadcom top secret, ACF2 or RACF. Now, this is security package independent. I'm collecting information based on the ZOS information that's going out there via SMF. So when you think about this, the different types of data sets that are out there in your environment are sequential files, partition data sets, and VSAM files that are out there. And we're collecting this information about, you know, who's maybe allocated, you know, created that data set, who's maybe deleted it, scratched it, renamed it, updated it. So when you think about configuration files, parameter files that I have, just for even for DB2 and IMS specifically, but when you even look at for the ZOS infrastructure, you want to make sure that it's secure. I'm actually gathering this information that's out there and reporting on this information that's real time. So this chart talks a little bit about the architecture, and Roy's going to talk to you a little bit about the DB2 architecture, and Thomas is going to talk about the IMS architecture. What's happening with the dataset STAP is, again, it's taking advantage of the SMF exit points within ZOS. So when I look at this, where I'm getting sequential files, VSAM files, PDSs, when some of that's been modified, and going back to what SMF will do, SMF is collecting information, what's really happening in your environment. So what's happening is it interfaces at that point, it's doing this very efficiently. So when you've got things like the creates, the deletes, the allocates that are out there, it's getting this information, it's going to this STAP agent that's out there, and then based on your filter, you know, I'm collecting that information, maybe I'm not collecting that information, and then I'm going to send this information over to the collector that's out there. So this is using a little bit different technology because, again, I'm looking at the infrastructure of my ZOS environment versus the, you know, the DB2 and the IMS are looking within what's happening into the data in my environment that is out there. So thinking about that, when I really go out and talk to customers about the data set STAP, is I really want to understand what they need to be looking at in their environment. Because when you look at this from the Guardium Dataset STAP viewpoint, is I'm looking at things based on, and this is the order of checking that I'm doing. So I'm checking for the data set name. Is the data set name something I want to collect on? Is that job name something I want to collect on? This group ID pertains more to RAC-F. It's the RAC-F. If for those of you customers that are maybe RAC-F on the phone, this is things that I can do based on the group name for RAC-F. Program names, user IDs. I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I can do things on DD names, etc. So I can actually go out here and look at this based on this. So when I talk to customers that are out here with the Guardium for data sets, is, this isn't just about privileged users. You really kind of want to look at this a little bit differently. What are my objectives that I need to be doing? If I look at this from a DB2 or IMS, and I'm focusing on those just because we got Roy and Thomas talking a little bit later, is what do I need to be doing from, maybe looking at those configuration files that are out there from a DB2 and IMS, maybe the underlying vSAM file that's out there for DB2 or the IMS files that are out there. Maybe I need to be thinking about the log files, but you want to think about those are the things that I may want to be gathering up front and looking at this and being able to report this information. I may not just want to do about looking at this from a privileged user aspect, because when you think about this is if I'm doing things based on a user ID, there may be a lot of other information that's gathered that's not pertinent to what I really want to do with my business processes. So on the next screen here, what I wanted to show you is if you have something like the product SDSF, because a lot of times I'm out talking to customers and customers going, I don't know where to start, but I want to look at critical infrastructure things that are out here. And this is just a display of SDSF of something called the APF authorized libraries. Those libraries in your environment that you really want to be monitoring because they contain code that could potentially bypass security, so you want to make sure that who's ever updating those may not be doing something to add code into these libraries. It is something you don't want to, because you don't want that to affect your infrastructure. So this screenshot is just showing SDSF libraries, and one of the reasons I bring this up is you can actually sort the screen based on the data set name. And when I talk to customers, I want them to look at some of these things, start thinking about what they really want to do, their overall business process that's out there. I bring this screen up because one of the things you may want to look at is you can see in this screen about halfway down, you have all these data set names that start with DSN, something in the middle, and then they have like SDSN, exit, etc. So this is where you may want to look at some of these things, take advantage of masking characters that can be out there in your data set environment, and be able to look at that information and create policies that are out there in Guardium. And a lot of customers have SDSF. I know not all of them do it, but again, this is just using some of the screens that are out there. If you have RAC-F and you have the health checker that's out there, you can gather some of this information as well. But I try to help work with customers to think about, these are things I want to monitor. I want to make sure my infrastructure is out there and secure, because I don't want my DB2s or my IMSs or anything else, even my other database products that are out there, or my online systems like CICS. I don't want those to crash because somebody may have changed a library that they shouldn't have. So when you think about this, when you want to collect this, and I've kind of talked a lot about this, is you really want to make sure, and these are just examples, and I'm using this even just from a DB2 and IMS, think about the install libraries that DB2 and IMS has. If you look at your change management process and your change control process, usually you want to make sure that only these people are doing SMPE work according to what they need to do. When you think of things like sys1 parmlib and proclibs, these are critical libraries to the overall ZOS environment. You may want to be monitoring this not just for IMS and DB2 configurations, but you may want to be monitoring this for just who is changing those, because the next time you IPL ZOS, you want to make sure that ZOS comes up. And I talked a little bit on the previous slide about the APF authorized libraries that are out there, you know, not just DB2, but other ones that are out there for CICS, other program products that you've got. And then thinking about this just specific to DB2, you've got like recovery logs, you know, the active and the archive recovery logs, the bootstrap data sets, the image copy data sets. And even with IMS, you have like database data sets, the image copies, the recon data sets, the log data sets. So when you think about looking at this, you can get this holistic environment, information of what's happening and who's touching these sensitive libraries in your environment. Now, from a data set viewpoint, though, there are a couple of things that we don't collect. And when you think about it, it makes sense just because you've got the other DB2 systems or the Guardium looking at this. So if you're on a DB2 system, we're not collecting information within the address spaces where the started task names are the ones that are related to DB2 that end in MSTR, DIST, IRLM, DBM1. We don't collect information within those address spaces because they're within the DB2 address spaces. And then in addition to from an IMS standpoint, you know, we don't collect information based on these program names that are out there within the IMS aspect that's out there, because it may collect a lot of other information that is not needed, but we don't want to make people aware that we're not collecting information based on those program names that are out there. And then just kind of to wrap up, because this is kind of laying the groundwork for everything else that's going to talk about, and Roy's going to be talking about up next. But when you start thinking about this, monitoring your environment, you need to really think about who's logging onto the system, what are they logging onto, where are they logging onto it, and that's where like the data sets is helping you look at and monitor the infrastructure. And whereas when Roy's going to talk about DB2 and Thomas is going to talk about IMS, now we're really starting to look at now how can I monitor the activity that's going on within the databases to make sure that I've got more of a holistic viewpoint across my enterprise from a ZOS perspective.